Let's see what's happening in the world of news. And of course, we'll see if some of the other panelists pop in as well. But definitely, a lot of people are paying attention to what's going on in Michigan and around other parts of the world as well. We know that a lot of people are still dealing with that shooting that took place in Michigan. And apparently, some other news is coming out of Scotland as well. And of course, people are still dealing with that devastation in Turkey and Syria as well. So that's some of the things that we're seeing in the world news and in world thoughts and all in that kind of way. So we're going to see what other news items there may be and what other folks may be appearing in the news as well and on this panel to share with me their thoughts about things going on. So we're definitely going to see what's going on in that space and what people may be adding to their thoughts as well. So definitely, there are a lot of things that are taking place here in the United States and around the world, and we're going to try to get to some of these and see what other folks have to say as well about a number of these news stories that are going on. Um, Definitely, it's be interesting to see what folks' thoughts are. If they've got any thoughts and want to share them, we would love to hear them as well. Um, the U.S., by the way, is rejecting Beijing's claim that it flew balloons over China. So definitely that is what is going on. And the U.S. tracked the China spy balloon from its launch on Hainan Island along an unusual path. And Ohio governor is calling on D.C. to address absurd train regulations after a toxic derailment. So that is one of the things that we're seeing in the news is that Ohio is actually upset at DC and wants to see if there can't be some changes made in that area and along those lines. So it'll be interesting to see what people's reactions are to the various news items that are coming our way and all in that space. But yeah, the Ohio governor is calling DC to address the absurd train regulations after that toxic derailment. So Mike DeTwine is also continuing to encourage residents to return to their homes. So, Ohio Governor Mike DeTwain is calling on Congress to examine some federal railroad regulations after the derailment of a train carrying hazardous materials in his state triggered an explosion that sent toxic chemicals into the air and nearby waterways. At a press conference on yesterday afternoon, DeWine, a Republican, said he was informed that the railroad company was not legally required to alert anyone in Ohio about the toxic cargo because only some of the cars on the Norfolk Southern train that derailed earlier this month were carrying hazardous materials. Frankly, if this is true, and I'm told it's true, this is absurd. That is what that particular governor said. And he also added Congress needs to take a look at how these things are handled. DeWine did not elaborate on the specific regulations he was referring to, but his comments came amid mounting questions about whether rollbacks to federal railroad safety regulations were to blame for the February 3rd derailment near the Ohio Pennsylvania border of roughly 50 freight train cars, 10 of which were carrying hazardous chemicals. Days after the initial crash, which caused a massive fire near the town of East Palestine, railroad crews conducted a controlled release of toxic chemicals from some of the derailed cars that were at the risk of exploding, sending an ominous plume of black smoke into the sky. So that's some of the things that are going on. I do know a lot of folks are concerned about environmental issues, and no matter where they may be, and all in that space. So that's one of the things that I'm seeing in the news that is being featured today, and all of that kind of way. I'm also going to get to the Scottish resignation and see if folks are going to join me and if they've got any thoughts on that as well. But you're definitely going to see what's happening in these kind of ways and all in that kind of space. So definitely it'll be interesting to see what folks' thoughts are about a number of the issues that I'll bring up and all in that kind of way and in the way of various news that is coming our way as well. Ukraine has admitted into UN fund that supports small farmers. So Ukraine's small scale farmers who are playing a critical role in feeding the population during the war will be eligible for funding through the UN's International Fund for Agricultural Development following Ukraine's induction on Wednesday into the body, officials said. Small farmers in Ukraine play a fundamental role in feeding the country during the war. So that is definitely some good news in that particular case. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in that and with other incidents of what's going on in the Ukraine as well. And who knows, Sasha may join me, and may have some thoughts on that and other things that are going on in the world as well. NATO countries are ramping up production of artillery munitions as Ukraine is burning through shells much faster than the West can make them, the alliance said on Wednesday. So that is another thing. And we do know that they are constantly trying to get military equipment as they are continuing to fight against the Russian invasion and all in that way. So definitely that is something else that is going on in the news. And of course, there may be other things taking place that we may get to as well. By the way, the special counsel on another matter has demanded more answers from the Trump lawyers on the Mar-a-Lago documents. The special counsel investigating former President Trump has asked a federal judge to order one of his lawyers to answer more questions about the Mar-a-Lago classified documents scandal. In a sign the noose could be tightening around Trump, special counsel Jack Smith demanded that attorney Evan Cochran returned to the grand jury. So that is what is going on there, asking that particular special counsel to return after he had previously used attorney-client privilege to dodge some questions. Smith had asked U.S. Chief Judge Beryl Howell, who is overseeing the probe, to rule that so-called crime fraud exception to attorney-client privilege applies in Trump's case. Attorney-client privilege generally protects lawyers from having to tell prosecutors about confidential conversations their clients have with them, but prosecutors can get around that protection if they can convince a judge that communications they want information about were made in the course of a crime. Smith's demand will likely be heard soon by Howell in a closed-door court session. This is not the first time during the course of an investigation prosecutors suggested Trump or others committed crime in the Mar-a-Lago investigation. Trump faces a probe into his admission that he took hundreds of secret documents when he left the White House in 2021, as well as efforts to obstruct that probe. Prosecutors issued a subpoena to recover any remaining classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, but officials who visited the property were only given a folder containing only about 36 records. Another Trump lawyer, Christina Bobb, signed a letter falsely stating that a diligent search had been conducted for classified documents and that all such records had been returned to the government. In August, a federal judge approved a search warrant for Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort home, where they found more than 100 classified documents. So it does look like that is still going to be remaining in the news for a minute and all along those lines. So that is one of the things that I am seeing in the news and around the news in that sense. So that is some of the things that are going on. We're going to wait and see if anybody else pops in that wants to share their thoughts about what is happening in the world and with the world and all in that space. So hopefully there will be some people joining me in a little bit to share their thoughts and what's happening in their world. But definitely a lot is going on in the world, and always glad to share some of these news stories and all in that space. By the way, there is a longtime senator that has announced that they won't be returning in 2024. So Senator Dianne Feinstein won't be seeking re-election in 2024. That is something else that is in the news that folks might be interested in as well. So they're definitely saying that she won't be returning in 2024. So we're going to find out what that news story is all about as well. And of course, there may be other news items that we get to in addition. Like I said, we're definitely going to get to the Scottish lady who said that she is having some issues with the politics of that area. So therefore, she's going to be resigning as well. So we'll get to that one in a minute. But Senator Dianne Feinstein said Tuesday she will not seek re-election in 24. The announcement marks the beginning of the end of more than 3 decades in the Senate and spurs a free-for-all among ambitious would-be successors for a rare open seat in a safely Democratic California. I am announcing today that I will not run for re-election in 24, but intend to accomplish as much for California as I can through the end of next year when my term ends, Feinstein said in a statement. She said she will focus her energy in her last 2 years in Congress on pushing legislation, specifically on gun violence, stating even with a divided Congress, we can still pass bills that will improve lives. On Capitol Hill, she told Axios, "The time has come. It's not till the end of next year, so don't hold your breath. But there are times for all things under the sun, and I think that will be the right time." Representative Adam Schiff, one of the House Democrats running for Feinstein's seat, said in a statement, "Dianne Feinstein is one of the finest legislators we've ever known from the torture report, a dogged pursuit of gun safety and championship of LGBTQ plus rights. Her body of work defines her legacy. Feinstein has had a remarkable career serving the people of California," is what Representative Katie Porty, a Democrat out of California, another contender, said on Twitter. "She created a path for women in politics that I am proud to follow. I thank the senator for her leadership and appreciate all that she has accomplished for our state." Representative Barbara Lee, Democrat in California, also plans to jump in the race. In a statement praising Feinstein on Tuesday, she said, "I know there are questions about the Senate race in 2024, which I will address soon." Feinstein said she's not ready to make an announcement. "I'll talk about that later. I don't have anybody in mind right now," she told reporters at the Capitol on Tuesday, adding that she is likely to make a decision in a couple of months. Leader Chuck Schumer said at a press conference that Feinstein broke the news to her colleagues in a heartfelt, teary address to the Senate Democratic Caucus lunch on Tuesday, and received a standing ovation that lasts minutes and minutes and minutes, one of the longest I've ever seen. So that's some of the news around her. I'm sure that some of our other folks may be wondering why she didn't retire earlier, because the 89-year-old five-term senator is the oldest member of the Senate and has a long and complicated legacy. Her ability to serve has come into question in recent years amid reports of her declining memory. She's bowed out from several leadership positions in the last 2 years, including Senate Judiciary Committee Chair and Senate President Pro Tem, which is third in the presidential line of succession. Feinstein was confused when speaking to reporters on Tuesday as whether the statement announcing her retirement had been put out. A spokesperson told Axios she approved it going out today, just confusion on the timing. The senator was out of the office for votes, a meeting, lunch, and more votes when the announcement was sent. Feinstein stepped into the national spotlight in 1978 as a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, becoming the city's first female mayor after the murders of Mayor George Moscon and fellow supervisor and legendary LGBTQ plus right figure Harvey Milk. She was elected to the Senate in 1992, dubbed the year of the woman after the election of four female Democratic senators, and authored the 1994 assault weapons ban. Feinstein served as chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee from 2009 to 2015, leading a sweeping investigation into the CIA's post 9/11 torture program, and later joining the late Senator John McCain, Republican of Arizona, to offer a legislative amendment banning so-called enhanced interrogation techniques. But we're going to step out right now and see if we can find out where some of our other people are, and then we might get to a story about Tesla and all in that line. But definitely that's what's going on over here. Oh, we've got Nick with me, so I'm going to bring Nick in and see that Nick is with me and all in that space. So glad that you're here. I was trying to find out where the other folks were.
Well, they didn't get the invites. I just out except for Lee Rhodes. So if you send Lee Rhodes, that would be good, because
I would definitely send it to Lee Rhodes. I thought I sent it last night, but these things happen.
I just got a memo. They go, "Well, we didn't get the invite, so they didn't get invited to the party."
Not get invited to the party. How dare they not get invited to the party?
Rough. So we got to make sure they got invited. But I was listening to the rap, but I'm not really sure what the big news is for today.
Oh, there's a couple of news. There was one, Senator Dianne Feinstein, one of the older members and everything, is actually stepping down, and she's up there in her 80s. So that was one of the news items that was out there. Of course, there was things going on still with the spy balloon and all in that space, but the main story that I was getting to so far was about Senator Feinstein's retirement. Some of the things that were going on over there around the Ohio train derailment, because apparently it derailed there, and there's Republican governor is complaining about the regulations around trains and things in that space. And you're a lawyer, so you've dealt with the
So,
whole legal space and everything. So maybe you have some thoughts around the train derailment and all in that kind of way. But
when you're talking about Feinstein, this is like a good argument for term limits, but
mhm.
also you can't have terms that are so short. I mean, for the people that run for office, the senators are 6-year terms, which are reasonable. And I mean, congressmen should have at least 4, maybe 5-year terms, but 2-year terms? Are you kidding me? That's just way too short. So we have some systemic problems in our in Congress and who they get elected, how they get elected, the length of elections, the amount of times they have to continue to run for office. 2 years is way too short because by the time they hit Congress, they've got to start campaigning for their next election to stay at least 4 years. And then there are people like Feinstein, too long. In other words, what are these people doing there for like 20 or 30 years? Um, I think what Jimmy Johnson said when it comes to coaching football, he goes, usually you make a difference in 5 years. It takes you about 5 years to make a difference in any sport. So a reasonable term would be 5, 6 years, maybe renewable one more time, and then that's it. So you let some young people come in and have a chance to show what they can do, rather than having these senior people that hog the top positions. And it happens there, but also happens everywhere. Well, we probably need a constitutional amendment to change that. But if not, you're running into the system that we're seeing right now, which is fairly what I would call dysfunctional. So
That's part of the reason that Nikki said that she's running, because one of the things that she argued was that she wanted to see a generational change. So,
yeah, right.
not
Why didn't
exactly a
you want to see
spring
a
chicken,
generation
but she's
10 years
50,
ago?
but she's definitely saying that, that this is going to be a generational change. I mean, there are some people in Congress, I think they're in their 30s and other
Yeah.
ages and everything, but it does seem like that was her primary reason for running it and everything, was that she wanted to make this generational change. Is one of the younger people in Congress, even at the age of, I want to say she's in her early 50s or something like that. But there are probably some voices out there that are in their 30s that would also like to be there as well. But
Yeah.
definitely that is one of the reasons. It'll be interesting to see if anybody younger jumps in and if they even are allowed to jump in. Because I know a lot of times when the young folks jump in, then folks complain that they don't have enough knowledge of how the system works, or that they are too naive, and a number of other complaints that we give among our young folks, whether they come out of the activist community, the business community, or any of the other communities that politicians can come from.
Yeah, I mean, it takes time to learn their position. So you do need, I think it's just like in football, you do need like the 5 years to turn a program around, or to get engaged and understand exactly what's going on. You just can't have these short-term Congress people that exist right now. And then the vetting process. What's this guy George, who's in Congress, Santos? I mean, how was he able to escape the vetting process? You know, the guy did not graduate from any college that we know of, or at least the colleges he listed. He he did not work for the companies he listed, so basically committed a complete fraud on the electorate. There is no law about fraud on the electorate because it's politics. I guess you can fraud people, but here's the reality: in every company in America, in every football team in America, he would be fired. And I'll give you an example. There was a guy, George Leary, who was the head coach of Georgia Tech. Good football coach, was there for years. Then they discovered that he didn't have a college degree. He lied on his application. They fired him, rightfully so. And then he did get a job with another football team somewhere else. But they can't maintain somebody in that position when they commit outright fraud. Now, of course, the argument's, well, they all lie. Okay, there's a difference between lying and fraud. Okay, his goes beyond simple lying. His is a fraud on the electorate. There is no law, to my knowledge, maybe one of our viewers can chime in, fraud on the electorate. Okay, it just doesn't exist, Mark. So the only one who can dismiss them would be the only people that could dismiss them would be the people in Congress themselves.
Right.
And the people in Congress themselves are supposed to self-police. But why aren't they self-policing this particular issue? Well, maybe Lee Rhodes can shed some light on this, because it really bothers me that we have a congressman sitting in Congress right now who committed election fraud. In other words, like I said, to me, it goes beyond the scope of lying. He committed fraud because, like I said, if we hired somebody in our company and they lied like that, we would dismiss them. And frankly,
yeah, I mean, are you talking about Santos?
yeah, football coaches like George Leary. I really like George Leary as a football coach for Georgia Tech, but he claimed to have graduated from like University of Vermont or University of New Hampshire. Never did, and they dismissed him. And so the thing is, it's quite common in business and in sports. If you lie on your application, that you're dismissed. Now, George Santos lied on his application, and he's not been.
I'm sorry, dismissed by who? Your superior.
But dismissed by Congress. Dismissed by Congress. Do not seat the guy. I think they already seated him. Unseat this guy. Okay? You can't have somebody who committed fraud on the electorate. Granted, there's no law fraud on the electorate. But the Republican Party has been hitting the bandwagon about election fraud for years. Now they have an example. It's right in their space, and they're not doing anything about it, which shows to me if they don't do anything about it, they're hypocrites. Okay, because the thing is, and rightfully so, they should get rid of them. Of course, there's no support.
Speaking of hypocrites, and we're talking about the world, and definitely going to bring in Shaquille as well as others.
We have Nick, the trust fund baby Democrat, claiming that the Republicans are hypocrites. I love it. Love it. Tell me something.
Shaquille, if you could stick to the issue, counselor. I know you like to bounce all over Australia and the world. But
good morning, world. This is Ishmael live from Seattle here with the flags.
George,
hey, Shaq.
I was going to open up. I'm only out for a few minutes today, folks, but we had some technical difficulties. But today, we welcome you to World Edition, Pod TV and Roku TV's World Edition. Everyone's talking about Michigan State, the tragedy. There are 3 dead. The Attorney General of the state will be addressing the state very soon. We pray for them. Over 30,000 dead in the earthquakes in Syria. I think the number is even higher than that. It's so tragic what's going on over there.
It's almost 40.
Over 40,000. My God. I mean, right. That's just crazy. Let me go through my list here.
It's about 49.
43-year-old gunman killed 3 people yesterday. They don't know the gunman's motive. It does turn out the unidentified objects shot down by the U.S. were not really a threat. So we don't know what they could have been. There's a lot of balloons flying over the U.S. for research and commercial reasons.
How did they miss one? They shot at one and they missed. What am I missing there?
And the amount of floating ice around Antarctica is reaching a record low. So does that mean that global warming is here? And get this, I was excited to learn, even though I'm not a candidate for it anymore, that birth control has shown to be promising in men. That would be interesting, right? What's taking so long?
I was having a conversation with
sperm counts from turning on for a short period of time, right?
Steve and Lee, I just actually learned about something. I probably should know about it already because people say you're supposed to check your T counts on a regular basis. But I was talking to a friend of mine that is knowingly going through menopause because of their age and everything, and they were asking if I had checked into andropause, and I was going like, because I'm a man of a certain age, around 60, and I'm going like, what the heck is an andropause? But apparently that is the man's version of menopause, but it is an actual term, and it actually does exist. So I was wondering, Lee, Nick, anybody else here, had y'all ever heard of andropause? Because it was new terminology to me, and I'm sitting there going like, I didn't know what it was, but apparently it's an actual thing.
Well, again, let me go first. Let me go first here. You wokesters, you wokesters, how dare you suggest that this is only something that affects men?
Crossword puzzle.
Huh?
Can you hear me?
It's
I heard you.
Yeah. How dare you wokesters suggest that this is something that can only affect men?
We can hear
and
you.
by the way,
Yes and no. It's
why
like
do you
a
need high testosterone? I thought that high testosterone was akin to toxic masculinity and was the problem with the world and the patriarchy. What happened to that idea?
Yeah, and what are you dressed up for? You look like you're about to jump off a boat or something. Where are you?
Well, no, because I came out here because I thought I'd get the beautiful view of Switzerland in the background.
Oh, you're in Switzerland. So
saving
what
device on.
city in Switzerland are we
But
seeing?
but unlike Africa, it is actually quite cold. And well, I'm actually in Austria, but the mountains behind me is Switzerland.
Switzerland,
So
right? Okay, you're in Austria.
yes.
Hey, did you get to
Now-
Switzerland?
I was going to bring up
now,
another.
before- One second, Mark. I just want to finish addressing what I was going to say to Nick. Nick, the questions about whether or not just Santos or anybody else have lied their way into a congressional seat. This is an important question, I think, facing not just the United States, but we're talking about the United States, but facing many countries. And I think the question becomes not just how to deal with this situation specifically, but how to deal with the situation in general. What happens? This is a real question of law. What happens when somebody wins an election, they end up in Congress or in the Senate, and they've lied, as you've called it, election fraud, they've committed these things, and Congress is supposed to self-police. Now, you know my thoughts and feelings on a bunch of politicians in one place. So, I mean, what do you do? What should the process actually be? Should there be an independent review? Yes, Nick, but you're saying kick them out, but obviously you don't have a process that allows that, right? You don't currently have a process that allows that.
Nick, there is recourse called the voters.
Okay,
Hold on a second.
there's the door. You show them the bloody door.
Yes, but Nick, that's fine. But how? How? What process do you want to have in place
Right.
in order to facilitate that? Should it be done through the judicial branch of government? Should it be an independent review board? And how do you guarantee that it's going to be independent?
Hold on a second. Nick and Shaquille, I'm actually going to throw some even more mud into the whole race and everything, because apparently you're in Sweden right now, and there is a leader also in Europe that apparently unexpectedly resigned yesterday because of outrage over her quote-unquote relaxed transgender laws that allowed her rapist to be sent to a female prison. So Scottish leader Nicola Sturgeon unexpectedly resigned yesterday. She was 52, so I think she's around the same age as Nikki Haley. Said she was stepping down, proud of having been the first female and longest-serving first minister, calling the privilege of my life to have led the country's government for 8 years. She noted how many will be upset by her shocking announcement while quipping that others will cope just fine. Every person in Scotland who loves me, there is another who, let's say, might not be quite so enthusiastic, she noted of her critics. Sturgeon insisted that outrage over her divisive gender recognition reform, which allows anyone over 16 to change gender designation without medical diagnosis, had not been the final straw. So she's saying that wasn't the final straw, but I'm sure that her critics will say that was the final straw and everything. The reform was hailed by transgender campaigners as a landmark move, but anger boiled over last month when it emerged that a shaven-headed rapist was sent to a female prison after declaring she was a transgender female. I have been and will always be a feminist. There's just set of her critics, including Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling, who accused her of being a destroyer of women's rights with the law. So,
Mark, can you define that word?
Let's not do that, like. Mark, let me respond to you. A couple of things. I think Nicola Sturgeon has a lot to be proud of. She's had a long run in Scotland. I don't agree with a lot of her politics, but she's been a great advocate for the people of Scotland. I think that she's done a pretty good job, and she's been there all through the whole Brexit stuff, fighting for what the Scottish people wanted. I don't agree with her position on the transgender issues, but the transgender issues is something that's in flux at the moment. We all need to really sit down and talk about and work out how we're going to address these issues. But what I will say is that this was her decision in Scotland, and arguably this is because this is what the Scottish people wanted. They wanted to see some recognition of this, and the UK Parliament vetoed it. So, way to go, UK, when it comes to really upsetting the Scots and making them feel like they don't have any sovereignty over their own country. However, I will say to the Scottish people, if you feel like you should have some sovereignty over your own country, maybe you'll understand why England, Wales, and most of the UK decided to leave the EU. But these issues are complicated. I don't think it's I think it would be doing her a disservice and the people of Scotland a disservice if you were to say that her whole political career comes down to just this one issue, because it clearly doesn't.
I mean, she definitely had a long history and definitely other things, but she did say that she will always stand up for any stigmatized, discriminated against, marginalized, and vulnerable group in society. So she did say that that's what she would do. She might,
but who cares? But Mark, who cares? There is not going to be a politician anywhere in the world that's going to say the opposite of that. This is the thing. People just say all this stuff and it sounds good. Nobody's going to sit there and say, hey, look, are you sick and tired of all the politicians that stand up for the underprivileged and the stigmatized members of our community? Well, vote for me. I will go out of my way to make their lives more difficult and oppress them. Nobody's going to say that. So what does it mean when a politician comes out and says, I'm going to stand up and fight for them? Every politician says that.
Every politician might say that, but there are some that their actions imply that they don't actually do what they say they're going to do. And I would say that on both sides. There are some people that say that, I agree with you that everybody's going to say the talking points, but then their actions are what determines whether it is true or not. And there are some that have done actions that have plainly been against the various groups and everything. So a lot of times,
in your opinion, Mark, you don't get anything for anything. Favoring one group will sometimes come at a cost to another group. So you have competing interests, you have competing people. They all need to be represented. They all deserve to have politicians fight for.
Before I leave today, I just want to say that we'll tomorrow talk about the guns in Michigan State, because it's just such a tragedy. And the other thing is Tesla is offering 28,000 chargers, but 7,500 of the 28,000. They just struck a deal with the Biden administration, so we're going to talk about that.
Yeah,
we'll talk tomorrow for another edition. I'm sorry I
get
to leave early. Sorry for the delay, but Mark, if you could talk about some of the issues I talked about today, and I'll be back tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll definitely do that. I was actually going to get to Tesla at some point or another because I was actually on
Black History. Give us a famous person of Black History tomorrow as well.
I'll try to get one of those as well, and I'll definitely do that. But one of the things I was going to say too.
Oh, how exciting! I better not miss that.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to say to Shaquille's point is that, and actually I hate that Steve is gone now, but that's part of the conversation that goes on even around immigration, because there are some people that would argue, and I'm not saying that they are right, that people that are coming from, say, some of the poorer countries may not get the same benefits as some of those that are coming from the more wealthier countries. That's that whole division as to one form of immigration, and then they want those that have the I forget what it's called, the HB or something like that, but there's the more tech kind of immigration.
Now, hang on, Mark. When you say immigrants coming from poorer countries aren't getting the same benefits as those people coming from wealthier countries and those people coming on H-1Bs, can we just define what you mean by benefits? People that come on H-1B visas, by definition, have a job when they get there. People that are just crossing the border with no real plan don't have a job, and they cost the taxpayer money. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing. Maybe you can absorb those people into the country and they can have better opportunities and they will eventually make an economic contribution. But when I talk about,
some of them are coming to farm jobs. Now, when I talk about bringing in illegals intentionally and everything, and that is a known fact and everything. So you can't say they don't have jobs. Now, whether they're being taken advantage of, that's another question.
Mark, don't go half-cocked into some other subject.
That's still the same
I think that immigration. Well, I'm still going to finish my point regardless. So, I think that when you have immigration rules, you have to make sure that people are being treated fairly and equally. And if you just allow some groups of people who are geographically close to the United States to cross the border, and they jump in front of the queue from people that have been waiting in that queue for years, I think there's a level of unfairness. Now, you talk about the farmers. Let me just remind you that it was your side of politics, the Democrats, that opposed immigration specifically for this reason, because new immigrants came in and they drove down the cost of wages, okay, because there was more supply. And the Democrats, being the union people, hated it. And the Republicans in charge of California, they're the ones that said, hey, we've got to do something. And then all of a sudden the Democrats changed their minds. So the Democrats used to be really opposed to immigration, and then they changed. And it was for that very reason, about farming, about the fact that you are farming workers. But Mark, let's not muck around with each other. I make the comment about. I make the comment. Let me finish. I make the comment about millions of immigrants coming across the southern border, and you say, well, it's not fair to say that they don't all have jobs because some of them work on farms they might be being taken advantage of. You want to try and tell me that there's 5 million people, the 5 million people that have crossed your border illegally in the last couple of years, but they're all working for farms? I seriously doubt it.
I didn't say they were all working for farms, but there's a sizable portion.
Well, then my point. So then my point still remains.
Construction jobs. There are a sizable portion that are working in jobs that are legitimate jobs. That the corporations are bringing them into there, and they know that they are bringing them in there. They are breaking the rules, and I'm saying the corporations are breaking the rules.
Mark, 5 million of them. My point to you was that people that come with H-1B visas, you asked a question. Do people from wealthy Western countries get more benefits when they get to the United States than other immigrants coming from poorer countries? And I said to you as a response that people that come in on H-1B visas by definition have a job, and the people that cross the border illegally don't necessarily have a job. You've responded with a comment about farming jobs. Now you've gone on to say construction jobs. Do you really believe that all 5 million of the illegal immigrants that have come across there are working?
You're part of the drug culture. There's no doubt about that. So I'm not saying that. I'm not saying there's not some criminal elements. But I have two questions. And like I said, Nick's here. He's the attorney. I've talked to some attorney friends of mine. They actually complain about the H-1 because sometimes it has some limitations and everything. There's actually one that I'm trying to get to come on the show that is a immigration attorney out of Chapel Hill, and she actually complains about the H-1 because sometimes that limitation that you're talking about, they are not always prepared for the limitation. So then they are sent back to their country earlier than they want to go back because they were given whatever that limitation was. So that is one of the complaints that I've heard about H-1 and all in that space. And then I've also heard some people I've also heard some people that have said around immigration, the complaint that say a Cuban immigrant may not be treated the same as a Haitian immigrant, and those are both off to our coast and everything, and some of that might be around economic issues and around classism, and I won't even go into whether it's around racism or not, but definitely economic and classism. So that's
maybe it's just a statistical anomaly, or maybe it has something to do with the way that Cuba is viewed versus Haiti. But let me just ask you a question. You're making a comment about the limitations of the H-1B visa. Well, I've got limitations when I come to the United States. You know why? Because I'm not a citizen. I'm not a resident. I don't have these rights. And if the United States says to me, hey, you can do this, but you can't do that, then I've got a choice. I can either say, well, I'm prepared to abide by the rules when I come to America, or I don't go. But what I don't do is just get there and then start whinging about the place.
I didn't say that they were whinging about the place. I'm just saying that there were some people that were complaining for one reason or another. They wanted to stay longer than they were expecting to. And like I said, I will bring in, trying to think of the young lady's name, even though I met with her a couple of weeks ago, but we were talking about even her having a show at one point or another on the network, because she has this unique idea of basically putting some of our historical figures on like judging them now as opposed to judging them when they were around and everything. And apparently it was quite popular on social media when she had the show doing it at that time. So it's basically like an analysis of
what does that have to do with her? What does that have to do with the H-1B visa?
I just said she was an H-1 visa attorney, so that's where the conversation was coming from. So that was kind of her points that she was making, and she was saying that there were some complaints around there, and I don't remember all the complaints, which is why I will bring her on so she can share those complaints directly, which is the point that I was making. So I will let her address them and all in that space when I can get her tracked down, because she's a very busy lawyer there in that space. So I will find out from.
She does immigration law. But hey, here's something pretty important when it comes to Congress themselves. Rather than dealing with Hunter Biden, they should have hearings on immigration. We have not solved our immigration problem. Hey, speaking of immigration problem, Shaquille, did you get to visit the president of Kenya, or did he stand you
up? The government of Kenya was incredibly hospitable to myself and the group. So I'm very thankful to them for showing us around and for their great hospitality. It's a beautiful country. I will actually be flying back in about a month or so for further meetings with their leaders and the president. I also got to meet some leaders of some neighbouring African countries. And as I said yesterday on the show, it's really interesting to see the issues that they are. That they are battling with, that they're trying to improve their country. And I guess during COVID, it sometimes gets lost on me. It probably gets lost on all of us, just how lucky we are to live in the countries that we live in. I think that You know, it's pretty cool that the stuff that we argue about is so stupid, right? The fact that Donald Trump, you know, he's out there, he's whinging the election was stolen from him. It's all terrible. You know, Ron DeSantis is going to do this. The Democrats are all woke. This is brilliant. We're the luckiest people on earth to be able to live in Western countries where this is the crap that we argue about. Other people in the world are arguing about how do we provide enough food for everybody.
So,
One of the issues that one of the sister-in-laws of the president mentioned to us was that there are some farmers in parts of Kenya and other parts of Africa that are actually producing too much food, and unfortunately that they can't do anything with it, so the food goes to waste. Meanwhile, you've got a big part of the population that don't have enough to eat. So there's some really serious issues facing Africa. I believe that Africa has so much potential. I think that they can do this and really improve their lives. But it was a very, very eye-opening trip for me, and I'm very grateful to the people of Kenya and the government of Kenya for their hospitality and for their graciousness.
It sounds like it was a great trip and everything, but you know there is still the issue, and I think I brought it up a couple of other times, and I'm not saying it is in nowhere near what it is in some of the countries like Kenya and even some countries that are much poorer than Kenya and everything, but there is still a rising homeless crisis in the U.S. As a matter of fact, they said it in over 500,000 Americans were unhoused in 2020, despite the rising budget and overall homelessness in the U.S. And definitely that is an issue that goes on. But, you know, there has been a diversion of money, and I would love to hear y'all talk about this. I'm thinking Shaquille may like it, he may not like it, or maybe even Lee will like it, but I'm just going to use Durham as an example. Durham got some COVID money, some federal COVID money, $10 million of COVID money to provide affordable housing. So right here in Durham, where I'm living, they are going to use this money that was federal COVID relief money to build affordable housing. So our mayor said, let's build some housing when the city council agreed last week to earmark the money. So that is money that was, I think, originally part of that whole American Rescue Plan Act. So what is our thoughts? Because Durham is only one example. There are other cities that are doing the same thing. If money that was, I think, originally for the pandemic is now going to be used for housing, which is an issue, whether it's in Durham or other parts as well. So any thoughts around this shifting of money to take care of what is an issue?
Yeah, it's kind of simple, Mark. Housing in the United States is way too expensive and overpriced. I mean, you know, so it's you move to third world countries like Australia, where you can live in the desert, in the outback. But the United States, you know, the housing prices here are just like off the charts. Part of it is only enough housing.
Nick, I know where you live, and I know the cost of housing in your neighbourhood compared to what we get burned with in Australia. Heaven forbid if you ever try to buy a property here in Switzerland. So don't tell me that housing prices in America are so bloody high, right? Yeah. Compared to where? And the example that you chose to use.
Bali housing.
Let's use the example that you used. What about those people that live out in the middle of the desert in Australia? Well, guess what? Their housing's pretty cheap. See, the problem with housing in America is, one, I agree with Mark that, well, I don't know whether COVID money should be used for it. That's not really something I can comment on. But I agree with Mark that we need to do something about affordable housing all over the world. But what do you want to do? You can do what New Zealand and Australia has recently done, and you can say, foreign investors, you can no longer buy property in our countries, driving down the price of properties, making it even harder for those pesky boomers to retire with the asset base that they have built, okay? Or you can build affordable housing. But here's the problem. Nobody wants it. People don't want to live in affordable housing. People want to go and live in these mansions and these huge, massive properties, but they don't want to be able to pay for it. Same thing with affordable education. People don't want to go to HSBUs like Mark is always talking about. People don't want to go to community colleges. People want to go to Harvard. People want to go to Yale. People want to go to places where they're going to have a $300,000 debt, but they don't want to pay the $300,000. Okay, this is exactly the same thing that happens with affordable property. And if you don't believe me, just have a look at the recent report on the BBC where a family of refugees came over to the United Kingdom. They were put up in temporary accommodation and all she did was complain about it. Meanwhile, you've got UK vets that are living on the streets. So again, it doesn't matter what you do; it won't be good enough unless everybody lives in a mansion at Martha's Vineyard.
A mansion in Martha's Vineyard.
That's right, and then I'll have to move.
Okay, well, I know you have this elitist attitude that if you lived in a mansion in Martha's Vineyard, you'd be happy. But let me tell you something.
I wouldn't be happy. If you see the taxes in Massachusetts, have you seen the taxes in Massachusetts? I don't think so. I might stick to Florida.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. The taxes in Massachusetts are pretty high. But the thing is, when it comes to the housing problem we have in the United States, is we are not building enough housing units. So we're going to have to somehow either incentivize, or the government has to step in and start building more housing units to keep the housing prices down.
Look, there have been solutions that have been tried. Nick, there's been solutions that have been tried. Okay,
Yeah.
Australia and New Zealand tried a program where there would be a waiver, either partially or fully, on stamp duty. Countries like Germany have tried a subsidy on the cost of purchasing your first property, right? Or the only property that you have, so you can't use it for investment properties. There's been incentives to allow young people to be able to purchase properties so that they can actually get on the property ladder. They end up signing 30, 40, 50, sometimes 70-year mortgages just to get in. But the government helps to subsidize that. Or you can do what there's a country, I forget which country it is now, but they had this program where basically you didn't even need to have a job. As long as you had a heartbeat, they'd give you a loan, right? And then they got these mortgages and they packaged them up and called them mortgage-backed securities, and they sold them all over the world, and the economy ended up collapsing, but lots of people got a home. So that seems like an idea. I can't quite remember which country that was that tried that technique.
That up and everything, but
perhaps that country, whichever country it was, might just want to be sensible and consider reasonable options. As I said, if you have a look at former Prime Minister Ardern in New Zealand, she's restricted. Canada has now restricted foreign people from purchasing properties to try and make it more affordable. But the flip side of that is you're decreasing the level of wealth in the country altogether. So, look, the solution, I'm not going to say that I know what the solution is, but I don't think that these solutions in and of themselves are going to work. I would prefer to see some sort of subsidy.
To go back to Congress should be having hearings on solving the housing problem as opposed to Hunter Biden. Okay,
no, I hear what you're saying, but
Nick, leaders
not my country.
need to lead. They don't need to get involved in minutia. And same with the transgender issue. That shouldn't be in front of them.
Shaquille and Nick,
you make the comment. Nick, you make the comment about Hunter Biden. You make the comments about Hunter Biden. So not my country, not my monkey, not my circus. Okay, your country. Tell me something. If you feel that's the case with Hunter Biden, is it also the case with Donald Trump when they tried to impeach him after he was no longer the president, or the way that the Department of Justice is going after him now? Is that a waste of time?
The whole classified documents, January 6th, waste of time. We have really important issues. Our number one issue, our number one agenda should always be national security. Number one, which they don't have hearings on national security. Number two should be the economy. We don't have hearings on the economy. The number three, all these other issues, and one of them is immigration, one of them is housing. That's what leaders should be doing. We have very, very, very poor leadership in Congress because if you had strong leaders, they would prioritize their time, prioritize their agenda, and go after the things that are important. Not transgender issues. I'm sorry, it's not important.
Well, I don't think this is just driven
down to some.
I don't think this is just driven by the politicians, though. It's also driven by the media that sit there and talk about all this other nonsense rather than focusing on really core issues. I agree with you.
I have 2,000 cousins. One of them is transgender. Okay, it's like 1 out of 2,000 people, maybe. It is not an important issue. Maybe it is to her or him or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's not a vital national interest. National security is.
That I hear what you're saying, Nick, but Shaquille, I've got to want to push back on something that Shaquille said earlier, and I just got to push back on it slightly. Hold on a second. Shaquille, actually, Yeah, because I want to push back on something you said earlier, because actually HBCUs have actually been gaining in the popularity, partially because of some of the athletes pushing for them to gain in popularity and everything. And there are some strong programs that exist in some of those HBCUs. I think Fitz still has a strong medical program. Central still has a strong law program. There are a number of elite athletes that are now going to the HBCUs because some of the other athletes have pushed them to go there.
In no way did that negate what I said.
Social class.
In no way whatsoever, Mark.
What he's saying.
Mark, in no way whatsoever did that negate what I said. Okay, no doubt people are attracted to HSBUs. People are attracted to community colleges. Maybe there's an uptick because there's more people around. Of course there is, but that's not what people are complaining about. People going to those colleges generally aren't complaining about the exorbitantly high fees. Okay, the people that are going to the Ivy League universities, places like Stanford, USC, great schools. My cousin works at Stanford. I know somebody who's at USC. These are great schools, but don't do it. Even NYU. It's a good. Well, arguably, it's a good school. They matriculated AOC, so we can debate that another time. But look, these are all good schools. But here's the thing: people want to go to them. They want to be with the most elite. If you go to Harvard, you're not just going for the education. You're going for the great network of people that you'll meet that will be able to help you out in your career moving on. Let me finish. Mark, let me finish. Mark, please let me finish. This is what people are going to those universities for, and this is why they pay so much. Now, let's talk about the last SCOTUS appointee. Okay, everyone goes, "Oh, it's so fantastic. She's a black woman, etc., etc." But she went to an Ivy League university. If you want diversity, and this is why I keep saying this to you, all they're doing is they're taking the very top echelon of people of color or African Americans, and they're putting them into these positions. Why didn't they get somebody who's a defense lawyer? Why didn't they get somebody who came from a HSBU or was a community leader? You know why? Because they don't care. They just want to pay lip service.
President Kamala went to Howard.
I wasn't talking about Kamala. I was talking about the SCOTUS appointee, which is a lifetime appointee.
Oh, the SCOTUS. Okay. Yeah, right. But you're so dead on right, Shaquille. Very rare time you'll be actually correct, but you're absolutely correct. The appointees, look at them. Unless you go to the right schools, the Ivy League schools, or certain schools like that, you don't become part of SCOTUS. It is a very elitist club.
That's right. That's right. But this is also some of the issue to do with how people are put there in the first place. Because oftentimes, to be given, if you're appointed and not elected as a judge, you often will have to be appointed by the Attorney General, right? So what happens? The Attorney General, if you do a really good job, win a really good case as the prosecutor, fine, you're in. Otherwise, you've got to be such a good defense attorney that they don't want you defending clients anymore, and they'll give you a judgeship. Otherwise, you've got no chance. Right. And so we have this skew in the judiciary, and this skew applies.
It's elitist. There's absolutely no question.
So this skew applies in the highest echelons of society.
Hold on a second. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding you correct from the past. But there is a major corporation that has recently come out, and I think they're doing their second cohort. And there are industries, and I've said this a couple of times, that have historically been and are still historically not having enough minority participation or enough leadership participation. So FedEx, we all know who FedEx is, announced last year, and now they're going to have their second cohort, the launch of the FedEx HBCU Student Ambassador Program, which is expected to give students from historically black colleges and universities the chance to learn about the company from executives and build leadership and career-ready skills, and then hopefully even get them jobs in that said company or a company like that and everything. So are those kind of programs not acceptable in the way of Shaquille and everything, or are those good kind of programs? Because it seems to me that
hold on.
Sales and accounting.
Hold on. What do you mean? Are they acceptable in the ways of Shaquille? I'm on your side, Mark. No. Quite seriously, I'm on your side, but you're not. You're the person who's not on your side.
Acceptable in the ways of Shaquille.
I believe that I believe that every person should have the right to be judged not by their skin color, but by who they are, what they can bring to the table. I believe that when a certain group of people has been held back, that we should try to rectify that and fix that. What I don't believe, though, is two things. One, I don't believe in having a quota system based just on race, because these big corporations or the big universities, or whoever they are, all they do is they just check the list. Okay? And if they can get the very top echelon, the very, very top people from a particular group, they'll take them. And then they go, well, look, we've ticked our diversity list without caring at all about helping the community. Now, I don't know enough about the FedEx program. If what you say is correct, well, hey, that's a great program. I would say to them, please don't forget about poor white children, because they're just as important. Okay? But I will also say, I'm pretty skeptical of large corporations. I'm pretty skeptical of governments. And I dare say that this is not something that they've done because they were sitting around the boardroom one day and said, oh, what would be a really great community spirited thing for us to do? I don't believe that, because that's not how corporations think. What they did was they sat there and they said, if we do this, we might be able to get a tax break. We might be able to get some special incentives. We'll look good. That'll be good for our share price. Yeah, let's do that. That's what they would have done. They would have done a cost-benefit analysis. They would have done a calculation. They would have worked out that this seems to be in their best interest, and they would have gone ahead and do it. And if you don't believe me, just have a look at what non-profit-seeking organisations do, like the big sports groups. Look at how woke they've gone, and they don't care. And they don't care at all when they start losing money.
I was actually going to get to the non-profits, because one of my concerns about this.
No, I didn't say not profits. No, I didn't say not profits. I said non-profit seeking organizations like the sports bodies, like Hollywood Foreign Press and things like that. I was going to
actually use the parallel of nonprofits, so I misheard what you were saying. But one of the concerns that I have, and as many folks know, I know Nick knows this, my mom ran a nonprofit trust fund for a number of years, that being the tobacco settlement money of Golden Leaf and everything. And one of the things that she told me, and she told several other people, is that sometimes the nonprofits get caught up in this cycle of constantly going after grants that are limited. So they're like 3 or 5 year grants, and then they don't have a plan of action for after the period of the grant runs out. So so then they wind up getting caught up in these cycles of grants and never really becoming sustainable on their own and everything. And that's one of the things that I'm seeing is my problem with this FedEx commitment, because it is a 5-year commitment. So after the 5 years, do you just like leave the HBCUs alone, or is there going to be an effort to actually continue it past the 5-year commitment? So that's when I see things that are limited in the amount of time that they're given, then that raises some red flags in my mind and everything.
Well, those are two separate issues. If you're talking about, the sustainable source of funding for not-profits, what are not-profits supposed to do? During COVID, a lot of these non-profits got criticized because a lot of them are set up in such a way that to comply with the rules, I'm talking about specifically the United States here, to comply with the rules, they only have to give away 5%, but they might earn 8% on their money. They give away 5%, their asset pool increases. I'm not opposed to that, but a lot of people criticize them, saying, well, you didn't really give an extra amount during COVID. You sort of sat on the money and let it grow. Well, what do you do? Personally, I actually think the grant money to charities is probably not a bad idea. I think that charities can often achieve these goals better than government could, but it does depend on the charity. And it does depend on what they're actually focusing on. We talk about the Sierra Club quite a lot. The reason I talk about the Sierra Club so much is because I used to love that organization. I care so much about the environment. I really, really love that organization and what it stood for. But now they've gone off into all these other subjects, which don't have anything to do with their original core message, and ended up just being an attack on a particular political leader. Well, I'm not American, so what do I care what's going on with Donald Trump? What happens when Donald Trump's not there anymore? I'm not going to join or not join an organization because of that if I was American and eligible to join them. So, we have to look at what are they doing. And many organizations out there receive all this money. They spend, copious amounts of it on their executive committees and on their staff. Very little of it actually goes to the cause, and it just becomes a big waste of money. So, again, what do you think the solution is?
Well, like I said, the way that I've heard that the solution is supposed to be is that you're supposed to, at some point, the organizations are supposed to find a way to be sustainable either on their own or with the support of the public and things of that nature. And sometimes it never happens. Sometimes there are organizations that continuously go through the cycle, and they are always that way. And there are a number of organizations, whether it's the Sierra Club or whether it's UNCF or whether it's some of the medical organizations. I know my brother is going to do a big event for the MS Society and everything because he's got some family members. As do I.
Lee, we're at the hour. Let's give you the last word.
I was going to give Lee the last
word. Thank you. Maybe we should have a whole show on this because I'm not sure that the government has any business funding a lot of these nonprofits. I mean, it's the taxpayers who are funding, and why is it the federal government's responsibility or authority to decide who gets what when these things that they have no business doing? I'm not saying some of these nonprofits are good causes, but why is it the taxpayer who should be picking up the bill as opposed to those who feel it's a good cause?
Now, would you just say that about?
Lee, I think the answer
about the federal government or the state
to your
government?
question.
Some of them are state government funded.
The same issue, Mark. Lee, I think the answer to your question is that theoretically you're probably correct. I mean, from a conservative, a constitutionally conservative position, you would probably make the argument that forced benevolence and forced philanthropy is not the purpose of the tax system. However, I think from my understanding, they like to hang their hat on that little clause that says that the U.S. government, I'm paraphrasing, U.S. government has an obligation to provide and provide and protect the general welfare of the public, and I think that's where they get those ideas from. But certainly, if they're going to spend the money, I would suggest that they should allow specialists in that particular area spend the money, and they should fund them as opposed to them trying to do it themselves. But that's a debate that we could probably have on a whole show.
Yeah, agreed. It can be a whole debate even about the reasons, because I do know, and I'm just going to end on this note, that some of the nonprofits also have target issues that they want to address, and sometimes the target issues shift and all in that space. There are a number of arts organizations that are
Mark,
only
one other point.
One
other point. You talked about these corporations, whether it's FedEx going to colleges that historically they didn't go to, and that I'm okay with all that. That's great, as long as they don't lower hiring standards.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that in this case, it sounds like they're trying to raise the hiring standards because they're trying to make sure that the people are trained in the leadership skills that they.
But see, this is the whole problem, and this is what I keep coming back to, right? And Lee, you know how many times I've said this. Yes, if you end up lowering the hiring standards, what are you doing? Because it makes a less efficient workforce, etc. But this is the issue: if you keep the hiring standards high, what you end up with, if you take any group of people. Right, Mark rarely acknowledges this. If you take any group of people, no matter what their circumstances, you're going to find that there's a group of them within that group that are the high achievers. So if you don't lower the standards, you end up with only the high achievers. What ends up happening is that those poor communities remain poor. Those kids that were left behind become young adults that were left behind. And then, they'll find someone, fall in love and have children. The cycle just keeps going and going. And I don't think that this is unique to people of color. This is also something that happens with white people in the United States and all over the world. So whenever you have programs like this, if you're going to go into a community and say, look, we are going to give people a hand to get ahead, or, like if you wanted to really bring these kids into these top universities, why not give them a transitional course so that they can catch up? Maybe they get more intensive tutoring or something so that they can catch up and then succeed. I don't have a problem with that. But just checking a box, which is, and I'm not going to say that's what FedEx is doing, but just checking a box, all that ends up happening is they take the very top, they take the highest echelon, the highest achievers of that group, and they go, look at what we've done for the community. They'll go back and they will support their community. It's all great. And that just doesn't happen. It just doesn't.
I get all that, and I think vouchers and school choice would help tremendously for those underprivileged.
But Shaquille and Lee, and we're going to wind up. I'm just going to land this last thought is there are a number of folks, and this is where I actually kind of agree with Shaquille, that are complaining about what is going on in tech right now, because there are a lot of kids, and they are across the board. They are everything from minority kids to poor white kids that have no clue what's going on in the tech world and the whole metaverse, virtual reality, and other kind of things, general chat GPT and all of that other space. And they are being left way behind. So that digital divide is becoming wider and wider, and it's across a number of ways.
Now again, Mark, again, if Lee's idea there, which Milton Friedman used to talk about school voucher programs all the time, if this was allowed to happen, parents who thought that tech was a more important thing to learn than gender non-binary studies could actually get their kids to go into these fields. But instead, you have this top-down approach, right, where they have to just teach one curriculum, and this is what you end up with. And again, you end up with the kids that are fortunate enough to have parents that can afford to send them to private schools, or that they've otherwise managed to get a scholarship, and those kids that are lucky enough to be picked for a charter school. Those kids excel, and everyone else is left behind. But what do you do? Because if you sit there and say, look, I think that we should focus on tech instead of focusing on social issues, all of a sudden you're a phobe. You can't win.
But there are charter schools, and like I said, we definitely got to run.
Mark, where's the teachers union?
But there are charter schools that are even, I know one that exists here in Durham. There are charter schools that are very much what you are saying the public schools do. They are geared toward one group or another. There's one here, I think it's the Durham Nativity School or something, but there's another one that are very Afrocentric, for lack of a better term. And the students have the right, and the parents have the right to send the kids to those schools as their charter system, if they want to send them to a school that's going to give them that kind of education versus what they might feel that they're
maybe to the point that Lee was just saying about the teachers union, maybe parents should be able to choose the electives in primary school and things like that. Just like if you go to a school that's secular, you can choose to, if you're Jewish, your child can do Jewish studies. If you're Muslim, your child can do Muslim studies. And, if you're Christian, whatever sect, you can go into those courses. And then the kids all come back together to learn maths and everything else. So maybe
the STEM courses.
Those parents that want to have their children learn about, gender doesn't exist and it's fungible and it can be changed and all that sort of stuff. And that's the primary thing that kids need to know. If those parents or families that believe that's most important, they should be allowed to have their children do that. And the parents that say, look, I actually want my children to focus on science and maths and all the rest of it, let them do that. Why not let them have a choice? I'm not so sure.
Because our schools should be making these kids, and they're, besides the education, should make them marketable skills. And if they're not concentrating on STEM courses, they're not advocating for these kids' future.
Now, what you said sounds. There, and I don't know, they're all pushing that way. What you said out there.
Lee, what you said sounds really great. I would generally agree with you. However, if I don't want what I consider to be the woke to force their opinions on me and any future children that I'm lucky enough to have, if I'm ever blessed with them, if I don't want them to dictate to me, I won't dictate to them. So whilst I agree with you that STEM is really important and other hard sciences are important, other people may not feel that way. And I would have to say, if I just change the subject slightly, there are a lot of kids.
But that's not the purpose of education, Shaquille. I agree, but that's not the purpose of a public education.
Well, that's in your opinion. So let me just say, in a lot of cases, there are kids that struggle with academics and have no interest in it. Those kids should be able to do woodwork and home economics and metal work and all those sorts of things and become marketable and learn a trade and be able to work when they're 15, 16, 17. But they're not able to either because of the same notion that the education system's not supposed to provide that. The education system to provide them with this great education. But not every kid fits into these molds. So if you have a kid who's not interested in this other stuff, do you force them into a curriculum where they're not going to do well? Or do you allow the parents to say, you know what, I'm going to choose what's in the best interest of my child, and it's not really the government's job? So this is the whole argument, isn't it? Should the education system and the government funding that education system tell you what your children should learn, or should you as a parent be able to decide that for yourself?
I agree with you. 1 second, Mark. I agree with you. Not all kids are fit for STEM courses. I get that. Which is why a vocational track, I think, is an excellent idea. But these philosophies that don't teach anything marketable, leave that for the home, not the school.
But Lee and Shaquille, we definitely have to end on this note, and if y'all want to respond, y'all can. What are your thoughts about, because I know there's one here in Durham, there's several around the country, around schools that are also putting them in the track of basically for lack of a better term, they're almost like criminal schools, because there are schools that are out there that are for the quote unquote troubled kids. I know that there's one here in Durham. There are a number of those that are around there. So what is our thoughts around those schools? Because that seems like you're almost encouraging the kids to go into that life, because there are some things that people.
I think if it's done the right way, that those schools can be fantastic in helping kids turn their lives around. But it has to be done the right way.
I agree.
You need to have role models. I can't remember which gang it was, but it was one of the founding members of one of the gangs who did like 20 or 30 years in jail. And then I think it was New York, but don't quote me on that. I'm sure this is not a unique story. Who then decided to help these kids and talk them out of joining gangs and told them about his experience and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's great. I think he's making a really positive contribution to the community, and that's a wonderful thing to do. So, look, I don't think we should ever write kids off.
No, if they're doing that, I agree. But there are some schools, and they're around the country that, for lack of a better term, they're almost like throwaway. They're almost like throwaway.
Yeah,
schools.
But Mark, again, what would be the alternative? You've said to me so many times, I don't agree with you on it, that sometimes kids need somebody who looks like them, right? But you base it on physical appearances. If you're a bad kid, okay, do you want to hang out with a bunch of goody two-shoes at the library? Probably not. But if you're with a whole bunch of other kids, you can go two ways. One, those kids might encourage you to go down a worse path. Or two, maybe you feel more comfortable when you can't pronounce words as well, or you can't read as well, or you don't have the maths abilities, or your parents are poor and you've been dealing drugs when you were 12 years old and now you're fallen behind, okay? Maybe you feel more comfortable with other kids that have come from that kind of environment where they've been committing crimes and they've been out doing all these other things. Maybe that's a better way of doing it. Maybe giving them that sort of exposure is better. I don't know. But I don't think we should get rid of those types of schools.
No, and I'm not saying we need to get rid of them. Like I said, my brother's done a number of work with those troubled kids. I haven't done as much work, done a little bit here and there in the arts, but not nearly as much as he has. But I might have some folks coming in and talk about that. And like we said earlier, this could be a whole show around education and the state of education and all in that space. We're actually going to get out of here, but I'll let Dan at least say hello and everything. Hey, Dan.
Hey, guys.
The link, but we're going to bounce in the show. We've been talking about a little bit of everything, but if you have any hello words that you want to say to hello/goodbye words that you want to say before I hit the button, because we've been going about an hour and 12 minutes. So,
hello, goodbye.
Well, we were 10 minutes late. That's why we went over. So,
yeah. Where are you now?
All right. See ya.
Hey, where are you now?
I'm in Switzerland. Stay back after the show and I'll talk to you.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Cool. So we're going to end on that note, and we'll get ready to get on out of here. We'll be back on tomorrow with more conversations around what's going on in the world and who the heck knows where Shaquille will be at on that particular day.